Oh no, that's just a cover image. There we go. Yeah.
All kinds of locations. Mine was near Pollock Road. That's the one I go to.
I don't think I have a second all the time. David goes there for he has United Health Care for his Medicaid. He sees different ones. But I saw comments and they've got maybe a couple other different ones. They got one for February or something. And they mostly got them for comments because they'll give you a list of the appointments and who it is. He showed me. Of course, because it's different. This is what I was doing right here.
I went there and the evidence was
Oh yeah. That sounds good. I have I was gonna share this with everybody. Okay, good. Yeah.
All right, y'all have fun.
Okay. Yeah, you too.
I think we'll have audio rather than TV, so
Okay.
we should be okay. You always test it.
Yeah, that's good. So if no one is here, but it looks like that's
Is it a PowerPoint? I can put it on.
Oh yeah, yeah. I see. Okay. I see. Yeah. You put a file on what?
Thank you.
Yeah. I do this all the time.
It's going to play better if it's a regular PowerPoint.
It also looks better.
Yeah, it really does. And which slide is that?
Slide right there. Yeah, we can just
Tag us in.
yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Oh, and the post captions are on. That's great. Yeah. Okay.
Unless you want to write it.
I think it's. I think I can try this.
Okay, I'm happy to as well. So.
Okay. And then this is
Yeah, that is here we go. Test. Introductions. First. Some upcoming news. Looks like it's go time. So I'll just I'll head out here and see if I can grow up with you. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Forum. Thank you for being patient with my scrambling around here with last second tech needs, but we made it just in time. So thanks for being here. I wanted to make you all aware of some upcoming items here. A week from this Wednesday, that will be the 11th, February 11th, from 6 to 7:30. There's going to be a special Zoom meeting. How many of you went to the Project 2025 sessions last year? They were so good. They were put on by Professor Jeff Scholes in conjunction with FCC Leanne and Steve Fail. They were 4 weeks on Wednesdays. They're going to have something of a follow-up, and it'll be Zoom only. The title of the talk or the interview will be Equipped and Ready, Minneapolis to Colorado Springs. So it's going to be very, very timely concerning the ice raids in Minneapolis. As it happens, my sister lives in Minneapolis, and she is very involved in that space as well. In fact, she will be one of the interviewees. There'll be two ministers on call that night where they're doing the good work, boots on the ground, keeping the peace and protesting peacefully and so forth. So it'll be a really great talk. You're not going to want to miss it. Jeff Scholes, Pastor Leanne, Steve Fail will be introducing these people and talking with them and interviewing. So it's on the 11th, it's 6:30 to 7 on Zoom. And just look in your emails. There's going to be, I'm sure, news will be coming out here today and throughout the week, so you won't want to miss that. All right. Also, a quick reminder about our technology. Deb Benton asked me to remind you all that this is being live streamed, and so you just look at the church's YouTube page. There's a subsection for forum, and so all these forums get recorded up there. So if you'd like access to that. Okay, so today we have Brenna Swift with us. She's going to be speaking on the disability justice movement. Brenna is a recent new member of the church, I think, and we're very delighted to have her. Brenna Swift, PhD, she works in the Disability Resource Office at Colorado State University, Pueblo, as the campus's access coordinator. For the past 14 years, she has taught classes in writing and social justice, and she's currently studying social work. She grew up here in the Springs and is the proud mom to her 2-year-old son, Tobin, who I know you've probably seen up on the chancel for many children's messages. So let's please welcome Brenna Swift.
Thank you, Rob, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, cool. Let me know if I need to talk louder at any point. A little louder? Okay, great.
Maybe a little closer to the mic.
How's that?
That's better.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. Well, thank you all for having me today, and yeah, thank you, Rob, for that very warm and kind introduction. I was so excited about this presentation that I kind of couldn't sleep, so I'm really stoked to be here today. As Rob mentioned, I work at Colorado State University, Pueblo in disability resources, which means that I help implement accommodations for students with disabilities. We have a high population of students with disabilities at CSU Pueblo, and I have just really loved that work. I transitioned to that position from another job there, and this one is fitting my values quite a lot. Today I'm going to talk with you about the disability justice movement, which is a social justice movement that originated in 2004, 2005, and had a really active presence during COVID-19 and the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which passed in 1990. And it has a lot of implications for our current political situation. So you'll hear me talk a lot about that as the presentation goes on. There's also a couple of videos that we'll watch together. They're both pretty short, but I think it's really important for you all to hear directly from disability justice activists and the people who have kind of founded the movement. So without further ado, I'll get started. A couple of things you might notice me doing. Whenever I have an image on the screen, you'll see that I describe it out loud. And that's to make it accessible to people with low vision or no vision. I will try to do the same for the content of the videos. And again, if you have any trouble hearing me throughout, just let me know. I'm also very open to people asking questions as we go. So if you have a question or need something clarified, please just raise your hand. So to start the practice of describing images, this image is by one of my favorite disability justice writers. Their name is Lydia X.C. Brown. They write very powerfully about experiences of autism. And in the image, you'll see there's looks like 4 people represented in this drawing, and they all have various disabilities. They're using various kinds of medical equipment and are kind of together in community. That right there is a big disability justice theme. So the title of today's presentation is The Disability Justice Movement and Introduction. So here's an outline of the presentation. I'll talk about disability justice's core principles and how they might differ from other movements and how they might differ from the disability rights movement, which was a predecessor to disability justice. So we'll talk a lot about core principles. Then we'll talk about implications for today. I'll share some closing thoughts, and as part of that, I'm going to share some books with you. A few of them are ones that my son and I read every day. He loves them, and I love them too. I think you'll see why. They're all disability justice themed books, and they really do a much better job than I can of kind of giving a sense of what the movement is all about. And then we'll have hopefully lots of time for questions. So an accessibility statement, I like to start all my presentations by giving a statement about accessing the space. The presentation slides are available online, so you can access them by going to tinyurl.com/Swift forum. Swift is my last name, it's easy to remember. So that is tinyurl.com/SWIF as in Frank, T as in Tom, FORUM. And please feel free to do whatever you need to do to make this space accessible to you as an attendee. So if you need to take a break, if you have anything that I in particular can do to make this space more accessible to you, please just let me know. And I'm happy to also answer questions individually after the presentation. I also like to start my presentations with a land acknowledgement. This one is adapted from Colorado College's land acknowledgement. I know that we actually have a land acknowledgement here as a church, so I was hoping to find that, but this is the one that I could find. So I'll go ahead and read it out loud. So we are located within the unceded territory of the Ute peoples. The earliest documented peoples also include the Apache, Arapaho, Comanche, and Cheyenne. An extended list of tribes with a legacy of occupation in Colorado is included at that linked document, Colorado Tribal Acknowledgement List. It's also important to acknowledge that disability justice as a movement really calls us to do more than put land acknowledgements in our presentations and just move on. Disability justice is about engaging more with land acknowledgements and seeing what society can do to repair the wrongs that were done during settler colonialism. Returning land, returning resources, engaging in anti-colonial action. Disability justice is very invested in moving beyond simply copying and pasting a land acknowledgement up there. So we can talk more about what that means too. But I thought it was important to foreground that at the beginning of the presentation. And a note on terminology. I like to share this with my students too. So you might have heard that the term people with disabilities is the right one to use. That's known as person first language. It puts the word people up front. The idea is that it's foregrounding the person and putting their disability second as not as important. That is known kind of widely as the most politically correct term. Lots of disability justice activists actually don't like that. And they prefer to be called disabled people and to have identity first language. So they feel very strongly that disability is part of their identity. It doesn't need to be separated out from their personhood. And so they use the term disabled people or disabled person. Some people don't consider their disability to be a strong part of their identity and might prefer not to use that. I prefer, when describing myself, to say disabled person. So you'll see me kind of use those two terms interchangeably. The key thing to remember is to always check with the person you're talking with, or the person who is in your community about what they prefer. That usually takes precedent. But for now, you'll kind of hear me use those terms interchangeably. And generally, it's acceptable to do so. We've kind of gone over this already. I mentioned where I work and where I teach. I teach a lot of classes on the disability justice movement and social justice movements more broadly. And I'm actually also working on a couple books that are informed by the disability justice movement. My relationship to the movement is also pretty personal. I grew up with a back condition, a spine condition that's not super visible if people aren't trained to look for it. I couldn't really participate in gym class, couldn't participate in some of the things that were going on at school, and there weren't really any accommodations made for that. And so I reflected a lot on how much easier and better it would have been for me if I would have had accommodations. I also have what lots of people in the movement will call mental health disabilities. So I identify pretty strongly with what the movement is trying to do and what it's trying to accomplish. What I don't have is experiences directly, personally, of racism. And lots of people in the movement, lots of leaders of the movement are disabled people of color who can speak to how their experiences of ableism interact with experiences of racism. So I like to foreground their voices. So just thought it was really important to mention my positionality too. So the disability justice movement is a pretty recent development, relatively speaking. I think these ideas have been germinating for a while, but officially that term was coined around 2004, 2005 by a group of queer disabled writers and artists of color, and they were in the Bay Area, and so it's part of the reason why I still love the Bay Area and like to visit, because it's still a hotbed of disability justice organizing. So people in that collective, which included Stacey Milburn, Patty Burney, Mia Mangus, and several other really powerful writers and artists, wanted to create a new kind of movement. So they wanted to argue for a world where disabled people are recognized as whole people with nothing wrong that needs to be fixed or corrected for them to be permitted to be fully part of society. And they also wanted to create a movement that was more inclusive than the disability rights movement. So the disability rights movement is a movement that really kicked into gear in the 60s, 70s, led to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, led to really important and powerful changes in our society. Judy Heumann is an important figure in the disability rights movement, and disability justice activists acknowledge the importance of that movement and why it was needed and what it accomplished. So our society wouldn't be what it is today without that movement. However, disability justice activists want to do a little bit more. They argue that the disability rights movement was led by middle-class white disabled people who didn't really consider the needs of disabled people of color and weren't really speaking to how ableism, which is prejudice against people with disabilities, is really closely tied in American society with racism. That connection has to do with chattel slavery. So chattel slavery was justified using arguments that connected ableism and derogatory descriptions of disability with derogatory descriptions of Black people in the United States. So the disability justice movement looks at how those two narratives, those two structures in our society interact and overlap, and argues that you can't fix these structural problems in isolation. you have to look at how they overlap and how they work together in the lives of disabled people of color. So I find that argument to be really powerful given the realities of United States history and our current political context. So the movement really has an intersectional focus. That term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a brilliant and fantastic legal scholar at Columbia University. The idea of intersectionality is that you have to look at all aspects of somebody's identity and how they intersect in their experience. So for example, me as a queer disabled person, I experience both homophobic prejudice and ableism, and they interact with each other in my experience and make certain settings a lot more difficult. Somebody who also has experiences of anti-Black racism have that in the mix as well. And so the disability justice movement really argues for centering the experiences of people who are most marginalized in society. That would be, in many cases, Black, queer, disabled people. And that's who the movement really seeks to center. So arguing for leadership by people who are most affected by these systems. So this is a video in which you'll get to hear directly from two founders of the movement, Patty Burney and Stacey Miller.
So you and I.
Both of them were active in launching the movement and making this argument for what disability justice means to do and how it should orient itself. And so you'll see in this video that they're describing the social model of disability. And so understanding that is really key to understanding the disability justice movement. And you will also hear them describe their personal experiences of navigating society with a disability. So I'll let Rob go ahead and launch that, and you'll see, and just to describe this video, what's in it, they are two people in wheelchairs kind of facing each other and talking to each other, making a lot of eye contact with each other, not really with the camera. So they're in dialogue with each other.
So if you and I go to a building and there's no ramp, typically people think the problem is that we use wheelchairs, where a social model of disability would say the problem is that the building's not accessible. And it doesn't seem like a radical concept, but it changes the fundamental way we think about disability and the work that we need to do to include people with disabilities.
People often don't understand ability to be within this kind of context and access to adaptive devices and where we are located economically. And when I have my access needs met, I'm functionally not disabled, but when places have stairs and everything is built for people that stand so I can't see anything, and it's a really dark environment so I can't see anything, because as you get older your vision changes. So now I need a lot of light to see things. In an environment like that, of course I'm disabled.
I really like separating out impairment from disability. So impairment as, like physical or neurological manifestation, like what's real. I have a physical impairment. And then disability is like what society creates as barriers because of the impairment. So like as you were saying, if we're in a place where my access needs are getting met, then my impairment isn't so significant. But when it's not because society doesn't want to, then that's a problem. So I think it's important to really think about disability and the context of what is disabling, like the environment. The last building I worked in, it was really cool because it was universally designed. So all the doors had push buttons or they're like magically open, as you walk up, or everything is like automatically at my height. And in that place, I didn't need a lot of accommodations. But then in an environment where it's not universally accessible, where people with disabilities and parents and all types of folks weren't thought of in the design process, that's when there's problems.
I'm not saying it's easy to live with an impairment. It's not easy to live. You know, and we have like 4 kids. It's not easy to live when it's like 20 degrees outside and for those of us in the Bay Area, 55 is freezing. But, you know, there are times when it's just not convenient to have a body. But that's not what oppresses us. What oppresses us is living in a system that disregards us, is violent toward us, you know, essentially wants to subjugate our bodies or kill us. That's oppressive. My body doesn't oppress me. My body's fine. But society, that can be incredibly oppressive.
I think when we focus on a person's individual impairment or diagnoses, as you said, it kind of like lets society off the hook. It makes all the focus on that individual circumstance when really ableism and exclusion and violence happen because of systems of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So we know it's not like an individual person with a disability that's the issue, but we can look at the way, for example, with policing, victims of police violence are 50% people with disabilities, if not more. Or if we look at the special education system, it's not the individual special education student, but we can see how special education becomes continued segregation for so many Black and brown students. So when we focus on like the individual impairment, it kind of takes away from that bigger picture.
We're seen as disposable because for those of us that are not going to have like a treatment or a cure with our bodies, and we kind of fly in the face of this idea of medicine as God, we're seen as less than, and you're awesome, you're fabulous, and you are beautiful, and how could the idea that someone would think that you're less than is just absurd. And yet that's like the thing with that, right? Yeah. And it's incredibly painful. There are always going to be crips. There are always going to be, people in pain. It's just the nature of being in a body. But the social body we can change. And that's, I think it requires a power analysis.
Remind me how long the presentation part typically goes before we go into
45 minutes max.
Okay.
So you've got 26 minutes left.
Okay, cool. That helps me plan a little bit how to pace.
15 for Q&A.
Yeah, how to pace the rest of this. So some important themes really came through that video in relation to the disability justice movement. One of them that I like to flag for my students when I assign this video in class, which I often do, is this idea that it's not necessarily the person's individual impairment that's the problem. It's not necessarily their individual health condition, although those can be very painful. And there's acknowledgement of that in disability justice. It's the way society treats disability and the way society is built. That is what disability justice asks us to look at. And this idea that disabled people are treated as disposable, that's a very painful one to articulate out loud. However, naming that enables us to ask why and who is doing that labeling. What structures in society are causing that? How can we change those? How can we make people feel like they're not disposable in a given space? Whether it's our faith community, our community at large, our nation. So it's very painful to name that as a reality, but it opens the door to change. So that's something that I really emphasize with my students. I'll flip to the next slide here. Oh, I see. So on the next couple slides, I have kind of copied out the 10 principles of disability justice, which were written down by a disability justice organization called Sins Invalid. And that name is a pun. It is a pun on the idea that disabled people aren't sexual people. They're not allowed to, quote unquote, sin, not allowed to experience pleasure. It's kind of a complicated and sophisticated pun on that concept. Sins Invalid is an arts organization, and we're going to watch a clip from one of their performances here in a couple minutes. But they wrote down these principles in order to clarify what disability justice is all about. As the movement picked up speed and gained more publicity in society, people started using that term disability justice a little bit casually and not really honoring what the founders of the movement wanted, which was attention to racial justice in addition to ableism and disability. And so they wrote down these principles to kind of provide guidance for the movement as we move forward. I am not going to read them all out loud, but I'll kind of flag and synthesize a little bit so that you can process some of these. We've talked about intersectionality. We have actually talked about leadership of those by those most marginalized as well. Anti-capitalism. So there's this argument that disabled folks really need systems and support that exist outside of capitalist society. So capitalism defines somebody's worth as what they can produce, how much money they earn, how well they do in school, how high their salary is, very much defined by how productive you are. Lots of disabled people don't necessarily have high-paying jobs or are able to work or able to succeed in traditional schools. And the argument here is that they have the same worth nonetheless. So this is inherently an anti-capitalist movement. And it's, if you're studying political science, or if you would be inclined to use this type of terminology, it's a pretty radical movement. It's anti-institutional. It's not in favor of making small changes to our existing system. It's in favor of massive socio-political change, because the argument is that the system is just really not working for those who are most vulnerable. And that I do agree with. There are some points here on how the disability justice movement needs to work with other social justice movements. Oftentimes, specifically, that's mentioned as the movements for Black lives. So the need to collaborate across social justice movements. There is a point here about recognizing the wholeness of each individual. So really honoring that every person we work with is a whole person, and that their disability and disability experiences are part of that wholeness, not something that we have to erase in order to recognize them as whole. There is a point here also on making the movement sustainable. The disability justice movement has an emphasis on rest and in participating in social change in ways that work for us. So lots of disability justice activists actually can't go to protests in person and find other ways to resist and other ways to argue for the changes that they need in society. I find that really powerful as somebody who doesn't feel particularly safe going to protests at the moment, although I think I'm gonna try anyway. So there's a big emphasis on rest and working in ways that support us. Let's see. So interdependence, that is an argument for working together to make sure our needs are met. A lot of that in disability justice has to do with mutual aid. So bringing each other food, helping pay each other's rent, helping pay medical bills. There's a lot of writing in the disability justice movement on how state systems are falling short of that. So we have to work together to get those needs met for each other. There's a really important caveat to that I'm going to share in a few minutes. But that's a really core part of the movement. You'll see here there's an emphasis on racial diversity and on centering Black and Brown disabled people. Collective liberation, that again, I love that term. It's an argument for working together to create the change that we need. And this is a video that shows a performance of Sins Invalid, the performance group that I mentioned. It's a really famous video clip. What it shows is somebody who uses a wheelchair, Rodney Bell, suspended from looks like a ribbon on the ceiling. And you'll see he kind of twirls around, kind of does a dance to the music and is vocalizing too as he does it. And the argument here is that mobility devices are not something that disabled folks are confined to. They're something that enable interaction with the world and can be used in artful ways and creative ways. So it's pushing back against this idea that a wheelchair is a deficit and something to be ashamed of. So I thought we would just watch a clip from this performance, since Sins Invalid and these performances are a really powerful driver of the disability justice movement. So I'll give this a try, see if we can play it. Oh, it'll just go to the next one. Yeah, looks like just a link to you. Thank you. There's no speech in the video that I remember. It's the visual and the music.
That's as big as I can make.
Okay. What do you all think of that?
Wow. That's awesome.
I know, right? Yeah, that clip is famous, and I bet you can see why. The singing was in the Maori language, which is an Aboriginal Australian language, and the performer is also Maori. And you can kind of see that Sins Invalid really prioritizes language diversity, cultural diversity, attempts to foreground Indigenous experiences too. And that dance just pushes back so hard against the idea that somebody is confined to a wheelchair, doesn't it? So I thought it would be really powerful to show this.
That was the Haka dance, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Which is itself a beautiful, intense dance.
I watched it probably 6 times last night, and it just never got old.
It'll pump you up.
Yeah, I loved it. And there's another theme here that I want to kind of foreground, That's the idea of joy and creativity and art as resistance. That idea connects with this phrase that you might have heard before, our existence is resistance. By creating art, by experiencing joy that society says we shouldn't experience, that's political resistance. I think that's a really powerful thing to remember right now. There's the importance of mutual aid. That's another really key theme in disability justice. I think I've spoken to that already. I also wanted to mention this idea in one of my favorite authors' work. It's the idea that disabled people have really unique and powerful insight on how we can create a better future, specifically because they have had to be so adaptable already, and they've had to survive conditions that were not meant for them. There's this idea that disabled people have the insight we need to get through climate change, to create a new world that adapts to the realities that we'll be facing. So I thought I would mention that as well. And so are you picking up on the idea that this movement has some implications for our current political moment? Yeah, so I'm going to speak to those, and I'm not going to mince any words on where things are at right now. So Trump and officials in his administration are very open about their desire to eliminate disability and disabled people from public life. So Trump's health administration, specifically Kennedy, have spoken intensively and constantly about their desire to eliminate autism from society, which the scientific consensus is not possible. It's not possible to eliminate the experiences of autism. So saying that over and over is proving very harmful at the current moment to autistic people. Trump is known for making dehumanizing and derogatory comments about specific people with disabilities. Some of the posts that I'm seeing on Department of Human Services social media and the kinds of language being used in general really call to mind for me Nazi German propaganda at this moment. So I'm just going to name that. And there was a strong tendency in Nazi Germany to produce propaganda arguing for the elimination of disability and people with disabilities from society. So I think calling out that historical parallel is really important. The Trump administration has directly acted to roll back these really hard-won legal protections for folks with disabilities. So for example, they have gutted the US Department of Civil Rights staff that enforces education access laws, making it much harder for disabled students to be in inclusive school settings and to point out discrimination that they might be experiencing. There's a wide range of policy changes that have been made that have had enormous negative impacts on folks with disabilities. And other shifts you might be aware of, when SNAP benefits were temporarily paused and when the Trump administration is arguing for cuts to Medicaid benefits and successfully cutting them in some states, that disproportionately impacts folks with disabilities. Lots of disabled people are not able to work or not able to work full-time, and so they rely more than the general population on these benefits. And so when there's cuts to these benefits, it can put disabled people in immediate jeopardy, their lives in jeopardy, and cause early deaths. So I want to be very clear about that as well. There have been some cultural shifts tied to the rise of the Trump administration that have led to derogatory terms being used more. So derogatory terms about disability, I'm not going to say them out loud, but there's a specific word that's now being used more as a result of the administration. And then this last point on here, I've talked a lot about mutual aid throughout this presentation, the importance of mutual aid. Mutual aid is this idea of community organizing. So the volunteering and increased donating that people were doing when SNAP benefits were paused, that falls into the category of mutual aid. There was a disability justice organization called the New Disabled South. It's a huge organization that serves southern states. They put together a fund to help disabled people whose SNAP benefits were no longer available to them. They had, I think, tens of thousands of people apply to that fund. They were able to provide funds to a small fraction of those people. And so mutual aid is a powerful idea. We need it. But what we really need more at this moment is massive structural change to make sure that support for people who cannot work, support for people who have disabilities of various kinds is built into the fabric of society, not left to individual nonprofits and community groups. So that would be something that I want to emphasize in relation to that. And so this overall situation at this moment is pretty grim. And it's really easy to look at it and feel a lot of despair. And so I want to end this presentation on a little bit of a different note, kind of in keeping with the theme of the movement. So I wanted to just mention a couple of local organizations that are consistent with disability justice principles. So the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition is a statewide organization that's led by disabled people, and they do a lot of really powerful advocacy. There's also independent living centers in Colorado Springs, Pueblo, I'm sure also Denver and other cities. Those are historically very important organizations that make it possible for disabled people to live in community rather than in institutions. So those are other organizations to consider supporting. There's a note of caution that I want to give here. Lots of organizations out there are about disability, but they're not led by disabled people, or they might not have any representation by disabled people on their leadership. And they might also not consider how racism interacts with ableism. And so when looking for organizations to support, I think it's worth asking those questions. How are folks with disabilities directly represented in the leadership? That's something I'd like to emphasize. And I have some book suggestions. I brought some books. Wanted to kind of end the presentation portion of today by talking a little bit about them, because it's really easy right now to just feel crushed by what's happening, and to feel hopeless, and to feel like there's no path forward for what the disability justice movement wanted to accomplish. I look at these books to kind of counteract that. This book is called This Is How We Play. It's by Jessica Slice and Carolyn Cupp, to parents with disabilities. And I read it to my son almost every day. He calls it the playbook. He says, let's read the playbook. And I'll pass it around along with another book called This Is How We Talk by the same authors. And these pictures show people in community, people with various kinds of disabilities, people who don't have disabilities, people of various racial backgrounds, people with various communication needs, all together in the same beautiful spaces, outside and inside. And it speaks to this idea of disability justice dreams. So what can we dream of? What kind of future can we work towards? What are our dreams for the future? I'm not willing to let go of those dreams. I'm not willing to let go of what the disability justice movement promises, even though the current administration wants us to let go of that. I get a lot of inspiration from the disability justice movement's refusal to let go of these dreams. So I'll pass around these books. And I know we don't have a ton of time for questions, but I'm happy to take any and all questions that you have. Yeah.
Just to thank you. I have a hearing problem, so having the words on the screen was really good. Thank you.
I'm glad. Yeah, I try to teach all my classes and do presentations this way. I thought it was helpful.
I just want to say thank you, Brenna. I thought that was an excellent presentation.
Yes, it was.
I'm so glad. I love this topic. And I'm also wearing a hoodie that says disability, it says disability justice is love, and it has a little heart on it. I call this my magic disability justice hoodie because I was actually able to still wear it even while heavily pregnant. It's like it expanded. So I love it. But yeah, thank you. I'm glad that this was this felt useful.
I have a number of questions, but I'll yield the floor to other people. One is just a confusion on the most basic thing that you're talking about, and that is this idea that disability justice seems like this huge umbrella by that name. However, when you talked about it, and some of the things that were written were, well, brown and black and queer people. And so I'm having some cognitive dissonance and not really understanding who the focus is in this organization. Is that these other disability groups are really the umbrella group, and we're more focused on, you know, these folks that haven't been addressed, and does that intersectionality include white, straight people with, anyway, could you speak to them?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because I think that question gets to some confusion more broadly about the movement. And I think it's important to understand, first of all, one of Kimberly Crenshaw's core teachings, and the Combahee River Collective, a group of Black feminists, they have some really important insight on this too. It's this idea that because Black women and Black queer people, Black queer disabled people feel most of the oppression, like all the oppressive systems that we have in society, they're at the intersection of ableism, racism, anti-Black racism, homophobia, everything, sexism. It's the idea that if we address their needs, everybody else will benefit because they are the ones who are most oppressed, most subject to violence. If we design policies and create change that address their needs, everybody else, including white people in specific vulnerable circumstances, will benefit. I personally think that is true. And so that's why I think it's possible for us to speak about how the disability justice movement prioritizes the needs of Black and brown disabled people, but in doing so, addresses the needs of other groups as well. And lots of white disabled people also really participate in and support the movement. So I think we can hold both of those things at once. I also think that the term disability justice gets thrown around a lot in contexts that don't really reflect those values. So an example would be when I was working at UW-Madison, somebody mentioned that if we fix the copier machine in our office, that would be an act of disability justice because it would make it easier for everybody to make copies, even a short time before class, even if they have accessibility needs around making copies. I would argue that that's not an appropriate use of that term because it doesn't consider the racialized context that we're in. Is that making a little more sense?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay. I think too, I read some other books, what my son would call big kid books. These books, big kid books.
Okay.
They're kind of really central books to the movement. One of them is called Care Work. It's by Leah Lakshmi and Kyosna Samarasinha. She really explains that a little better in there, I think. Okay. And so I'll leave these up here too for people to kind of page through before I have to take them home today. There's 4 of them here. They're all really central books to the movement. And I'm also happy to talk about this more individually because I know it's a sticking point for a lot of people.
Okay.
But I think it's worth pushing back against And I know this is not what you were saying at all, but it's worth pushing back against the all lives matter type of discourse that can come up in relation to who we're focusing on in the movement.
And one thing I didn't see that I might have thought I would have seen, but again, obviously I already picture the spirit of it, is something about related to work.
Yeah.
And meaningful work, remunerative work. I just didn't see that. Like I might have thought that if you have 10 principles or even more principles, that might have been mentioned. Is that intentionally left out?
It's an interesting point. I think it is intentionally left out of the 10 principles because the argument is you shouldn't have to work and have a paid job in order to be considered valuable to society.
Right, but it's some people might like to.
Yeah.
It seems like it should be available to them.
I totally agree. Yeah. I think you're right. I think a lot of organizations do prioritize creating work opportunities and making workplaces accessible. And that's part of my job too.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I have a background in special education in different areas, and then my mom died of a degenerative disease similar to ALS. So we saw, as she declined was in the wheelchair, places that really go into restaurants were oh, my husband will just have to carry her up the stairs, or things that I hadn't realized until we were in that situation. But I worked a lot with teachers, and I think one thing I loved in the video, although you said this language may or may not identify with everyone, is that the impairment is separate from the disability. Yes, I have this impairment, but if there's access, and especially in schools, if teachers are willing to recognize the impairment and adjust the classroom around it, then it might not show up in the same way as a disability, right? It is and isn't, but it's just, I like that language as society is creating this by, and I think it's important, maybe this will help too, is with teachers that I work with, it's they feel this need to okay, but if I have a special corner for this child, would it be fair for all these children? Because they don't all have their own little tent corner. But I have really inspiring teachers to be well, we don't all come in with the same impairments, right? So it wouldn't be this one kindergarten teacher would sit and the first day of school, she'd be I wear glasses, right? We don't all need glasses. I just need glasses. So it wouldn't be fair if everyone has glasses. It'd be fair if I have glasses and everyone has what they need.
Yeah.
And so I think access in schools is there's a child that comes in with a lot of impairments. The quiet corner or their own tent, which would make a book of their family members, in their own corner, creates fairness, because not everyone comes in with that same need, same that, Yeah, and it's all having glasses isn't fair. All having what we need is fair, and that may or may not be that. That is where the accommodations equal fairness.
I love that. I love the way you explained it with the glasses.
It helps the kindergartners, and the kindergartners, if they prep it the first day, this is just this one child's space. It's not for everyone. It's what he needs, just like you need something different. They don't care. They're oh, okay.
Yeah,
they truly, they don't go well, they don't, they're oh, that's, because they can sense that his emotional regulation is different than theirs. And they can sense that, they like the piece of everyone getting what they need. They want it too.
It's always the adults that have the problem.
Yeah.
It is.
Always accept.
Yeah. That's what I've noticed about my son too. Tobin is 2.5, and he's starting to pick up more on these things. Mm-hmm. And I was so excited when he started to really just love these books that I'm passing around. We read them, he requests to read them every day. I almost have them memorized. And you can see kind of the depictions of people in those books help normalize using assistive devices and mobility devices. And you're also speaking to something I've noticed, when I show this video to my students, they love it. They eat it up. I teach primarily college students, and at CSU Pueblo, I have a lot of older students too. They're wow, this is a revelation for me. Some of them have that reaction. Others have kind of always intuitively understood this, but really appreciate it, having it out there. So I think it has really powerful implications for education. Thank you for sharing.
The only other thing I'll say is I think think that helps. Like conversations with my 7-year-old who like doesn't have like any known major impairments at this point. I feel like it's important because I feel like as a special ed, working in special ed, there's so much effort on trying to like have the children that have enough challenges and impairments to figure out how to adapt to all the other kids, right? We don't have enough conversations with the other children of how we can all adapt to each other, right? And I think sometimes like I would notice like some kids with autism like would struggle with self-regulation around anger, and other kids would be like not picking up on those cues, and they're, you know, too close to them, and then they would get injured. And it's like, I think we can have conversations with all of, you know, that's kind of like the privilege of like maybe having quite straight, you know, abled bodies, is that like we can be then advocates to advocate for children with less obvious impairments to add, you know, like where my son will be like, well, move away. Notice those cues. Like if you are struggling, like it's too much to expect a child with autism to adapt to every child in the classroom when they're dealing enough with their own self-regulation. But the other kids can pick up those social, kids who have the privilege to pick up social cues can adapt to that child. They can get out of the way. They can give them space. You know, so I think it's important because I felt like so many kids with special needs would get, it would just be all the focus on like what they need to learn to adapt to the classroom. And I'm like, there's 25 other children that can adapt to this one child. Like we should have these conversations with all of them.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And something you said reminded me too that so like parents with disabilities are often really stigmatized in medical settings and society at large. But one of the most powerful books I recently read was by the same author who wrote the children's books, Jessica Slice. It's called Unfit Parent, and it's this idea that because disabled people have to adapt to difficult conditions all the time, we're actually pretty good at adapting to the demands of being a parent and how ridiculously demanding a newborn child is, and to kind of rearranging our lives around these bodily needs and around people who are learning social cues. It's just a much more liberating mindset, isn't it? I think it's really powerful, and I'm so glad you're explaining these links to the work that you do with younger kids. That makes me really happy. Yeah.
I can't believe I'm in the position of saying something that's going to sound like I'm defending Kennedy, but when you talked about autism, I couldn't help but think of like if somebody said kind of this what I consider parallel, but you can tell me if it's not parallel. You know, saying we want to eliminate cancer, that's aspirational. That's no slur on those of you in the audience that have cancer. We're not saying you're worthless or you can't do anything. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, you know, this is a condition that has hurt a lot of people, and we'd like people in the future not to be hurt by it.
Yeah, I think, so I'm also very much in favor of a cure for cancer. Would love to have that happen sooner rather than later. I think the difference here is that there's emerging scientific consensus and dialogue on the fact that autism probably can't be cured in any way.
I don't think autism or cancer can either, but like I said, maybe it's not a direct parallel, you know?
Yeah, it's like a tempting parallel for sure, and I find myself thinking that sometimes too in relation to the back condition I have. Like, wouldn't it have been better to just fix it like when I was younger? So there are some disabilities that are very painful that people might want to cure. I think the difference with the autism discourse is that there is no cure for autism, and there probably won't be one because it has multiple causes. It's multifactorial. It has multiple expressions. And the argument is that if we focus on curing autism, it's sending a message to people whose way of interacting with the world is autistic, and that's core to who they are, sending a message that we don't want them. And I get that that's not what you're arguing for right now, but that's kind of part of the argument against focusing discussion on about autism on here only. Yeah.
Well, everyone, that takes us to the end of the hour, so we want to thank Dr. Swift.
I'll stick around for a few minutes up here if there's any questions. Feel free to come look at these books too. And I look forward to seeing you all around. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much.
And there's some thought that
I love the concept of the future is disabled, getting light, this claustrophe, you're going to need people well accustomed to.
I'll follow you.
Yeah.
I don't want to step on your toes.
Probably my favorite author. She came out with that book.
You were scarce topics. Reading the bottom of the barrel.
Once you get out, it's almost like myself possibly. You're functional.
Absolutely.
With your functionality.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can send you the slides.
But you know, this friend of mine, I got it's not the
Yes, that was great. Yeah.
I find somebody that's it seemed
There's somebody I'm
like
just
taking it apart and
Yeah.
And you appear to be.
and he was talking.
So,